let's practice symbolizing arguments in statement logic. Here again is that nifty chart from the last video. These are our 5 symbols for 5 basic kinds of compound statements we want to be able to symbolize. Now, what we're working towards is what we call the truth table method, which will allow us to test, in theory, any argument we ever come across. In theory, not in practice, but in theory, we can test any argument we ever come across for validity using the truth table method. We're working towards that. But for now, we're just practicing being able to symbolize arguments with a more complete symbolization system. What I've been emphasizing this whole time in categorical logic and in statement logic is schemes of abbreviation. That is to say, use capital letters to symbolize the small parts of an argument and use this symbolization system to break down an argument into its parts so that we can see the pattern of reasoning more clearly. That's how we test an argument for validity. And in categorical logic, we use capital letters to symbolize the terms, and in statement logic, we use capital letters to symbolize the atomic statements, those being the statements that are not made of any other statements. In compound statements such as these, negation, conjunction, disjunction, conditional statement, and biconditional statement. Statements such as these can be symbolized, but you have a more complete symbolization system when instead of writing out not A for it is not the case that sentence A is true, you can just write out tilde A, or you can write A dot B for sentence A and sentence B are both true rather than A and B. And instead of writing if A then B, you can write A horseshoe B, which means the same thing, but it's much easier to test our arguments for validity if we can symbolize them more thoroughly. We're just symbolizing things, symbolizing arguments more thoroughly so that it's a little easier to look directly at the pattern of the argument and use what we see in that pattern to see if the argument is valid. Now, before we go to the truth table method, which will probably be in the next video, let's practice doing some symbolization using this resource and these extra symbols we've got. I'm going to see if I can just copy and paste the symbols because I'm sure to want them shortly as I do some symbolization. And I want them ready to hand without having to scroll up a lot. Some of them you can just type in the keyboard, not all of them. All right, so what we should start doing now is use these symbols anytime we're using our famous forms method. So let's practice with schemes of abbreviation. And I have here 2 arguments that we want to apply the famous forms method to, and a template for using a scheme of abbreviation and testing these arguments for validity. And the scheme of abbreviation means first, give a key, give a legend. Well, give a scheme of abbreviation, namely, give symbols for the atomic propositions in the argument. Then, restate the argument using those symbols. Then, if it's one of the famous forms, name the famous forms, then name the famous form it is, and then say whether it's valid or invalid based on which form we're dealing with. All right, so this argument is, let's see, either Socrates is wise or else Augustine is wise. Socrates certainly is not wise, therefore Augustine is wise. Well, I think it's fairly straightforward that we want to symbolize the statement Socrates is wise with an S. In theory, you can use X, Y, Z, A, B, C. You can use any symbol you like, as long as it's a capital English letter. And if we had different customs, we could have used different symbols besides capital English letters. But it's so simple, so straightforward. There's no complication. I think S for Socrates is wise, and A for Augustine is wise. Those are our symbols. That's the beginning. That's the first step of applying the famous forms method using the scheme of abbreviation. Now we symbolize the sentences. Here's where we'll get to some new material, because I don't think we've even done this in this series. Well, let's do it in 2 stages. It might be a little simpler if we do it this way. Our first premise is either S or A. Either Socrates is wise or Augustine is wise. Our second premise is it is not the case that Socrates is wise, not S. And then our conclusion is therefore A. Augustine is wise. So now let's symbolize it. And we're going to need a tilde and a wedge. So remember, not S and tilde S mean exactly the same thing. We're just using a different, more detailed symbolization system. So we have more symbols and less original argument, and therefore we can look at the structure, the pattern of the argument more easily. Now, either S or A, that translates to S wedge A. Either S or A means S wedge A, SVA. So the argument is SVA tilde S, therefore A, which means either S or A, not S, therefore A. And what argument is that? What argument pattern, I mean? You should recognize it by now. This is a disjunctive syllogism. It has the form P or Q, not P, therefore Q. And the disjunctive syllogism pattern is valid. So the argument is valid, and that's that. Let's do the next one. If Confucius is better than Hume, then we should study Confucius in philosophy class. Confucius is way the heck better than dang old Hume. Hume is a loser, so I say we should study Confucius. All right, I think we should symbolize these pretty straightforwardly. There's a lot of rhetoric in this argument that we could ignore. Maybe it's rhetorically got some purpose, but logically it's not doing much. Confucius is better than Hume. Maybe we can take the unstated implication that it's specifically better at philosophy. Confucius is a better philosopher than Hume. That's our first atomic proposition. The next one is we should study Confucius in philosophy class. I think we should symbolize one as B and the other as S, although it doesn't really matter. You could do it as A and B. You could even do it as B and S, S and B instead of B and S, though you're more likely to get confused. X and Y would work just fine. It doesn't matter. But I think it's usually better to choose a capital letter that helps us easily link that capital letter symbol to the atomic proposition. We're working with B for better and S for study. So Confucius is a better philosopher than Hume is one of our atomic propositions. Another atomic proposition is we should study Confucius in philosophy class. And we're reducing the argument to if Confucius is a better philosopher than Hume, then we should study Confucius in philosophy class. Confucius is a better philosopher than Hume, therefore we should study Confucius in philosophy class. And we're leaving out way the heck. We're even leaving out Hume as a loser. Maybe there's an implicit further step. If Hume is a loser, then Confucius is better than Hume. Hume is a loser, therefore Confucius is better than Hume. Keep it simple. We don't need to get that complex. I think this is just rhetoric. I think this is just adding to our strong sense of Confucius being a whole lot better than dang old Hume, but we don't even need to say whole lot. We don't even need to say dang old. I think this is a very sensible way of representing the argument. Very simple. If Confucius is a better philosopher than Hume, then we should study Confucius in philosophy class. Confucius is a better philosopher than Hume, therefore we should study Confucius in philosophy class, and that's it. That's all the symbolization we need. Now we can even ignore what came before and just look at this pattern. What pattern is it? Well, if you needed to, you could do that extra step I mentioned, I think 2 videos back. Replace in an orderly and uniform way your specific symbols with, replace in an orderly way your specific symbols with lowercase p and q. To have an even more direct look at the pattern of the argument. Because here what we have, if B then S, B therefore S, here we have the symbolized argument. It's a very specific argument. It's this argument symbolized. Here we have this argument symbolized, but we can replace our atomic propositions with symbols that stand for any proposition. to get at the general argument pattern. Now, we're no longer symbolizing the argument, but we are looking at directly the argument pattern. And the argument pattern is if P then Q, P therefore Q. So it's a modus ponens argument. You don't need this step unless your teacher insists on it. I don't think it's necessary. I think you should do it if it helps you. This is a modus ponens argument, which is a valid argument pattern, so it's a valid argument. So now, you know what step I skipped? The whole reason we're doing this video. What did I skip? I skipped the symbolization for our connectives. If B, then S. So I want to use, I thought I control V'd and kept it. I've lost my, what's the word? Clipboard? So what do you call it? I was saving these things in the clipboard. I want a wedge. No, a horseshoe. I want a horseshoe. If B, then S means B horseshoe S. So that's the symbol. And if you wanted to get technical, if you wanted to be rather, let's say, precise, thorough, the generic pattern could also be re-symbolized, should be re-symbolized using these symbols. P horseshoe Q, P therefore Q. In any case, it's a modus ponens, it's a valid argument, and we're done. Now, let's look at this argument. This is the, let's call it the extended edition of Socrates' argument from Plato's Apology. And let's symbolize this one, but we don't have a method in place for testing it for validity because it's not a famous form. It's basically a famous form plus some extra stuff. It's a constructive dilemma plus some extra stuff, the extended edition. We looked at merely the constructive dilemma, I think 2 videos back, but there's more to this argument than just that. So let's look at the more to the argument than just that. And specifically, let's symbolize it, but not test it for validity because we don't have a method in place. That method will probably happen in the next video. So either there is life after death or there is not. If there is not, then death is just the end of experience. If death is the end of experience, then there's no suffering after death. If there's no suffering after death, then there's no point fearing death. But if there is life after death, then we need to be good no matter what. Therefore, either we need to be good no matter what, or there's no point fearing death anyway, and either way, there's no point committing some injustice to save our own lives. Wow, what a beautiful argument. Let's symbolize as much as we can, which I sure hope is all of it. There's life after death. That's going to be our first atomic proposition. And I think that's going to be best symbolized with the simple L. Now, interestingly, this atomic proposition appears here in the first premise. Either there's life after death or there is not. So here's what you're tempted to do. Starting right now, I'm going to be making mistakes until I say I'm done making this mistake. What you're tempted to do is symbolize the argument thus. Say L means there's life after death. Some other capital letters say N means there's not life after death, and think that the argument means either L or N. That's a mistake. And now I'm going to stop making that mistake. Here's a better way of doing the argument. Understand, in fact, this is the only strictly speaking correct way. The other way was a mistake. Understand that there is life after death. Let's color code this, shall we? There is life after death is an atomic proposition. There is not life after death is its negation. So the first premise is actually either L or not L. Now let me just pause for a moment to get all my symbols down here where I want them. I'll need to copy and paste some, or maybe all of these, probably not all of them, but we'll see. I'll need to copy and paste a number of these as we go. All right. So let's finish symbolizing this first premise. Either there is life after death or there is not. We've not properly symbolized it yet because this is a wedge premise. Either L or not L. And that means we want the V here. But also that not L should be written out in the symbolic form, L wedge tilde L. And you see how this is a great argument, or at least it starts off great. We're not going to test the whole thing, but this is a very good first premise. It's invincible. Either there is or there isn't something. This premise is, well, what we could call an absolute disjunction. Either a statement is true or the same statement is not true. Well, it can't be neither of those two options. So this is a very good first premise. This first premise is invincible. Now, if there is not life after death, then death is just the end of experience. So we still have that L appearing in our next premise. Let's find death is the end of experience and see where else it may occur. I think it only appears twice in the original argument. Let's give that a blue color. I think I have too many atomic propositions. If anyone's colorblind, sorry, I can't help you with the color coding. But you don't need the color coding. The color coding is here to help people who could benefit from it. Let's symbolize death as the end of experience, or death is just the end of experience, as E. And we're treating death as the end of experience and death is just the end of experience as meaning the same thing, because they do. There's no difference between them that matters to this argument. Looks like we're going to have several premises here and also several atomic propositions. Let's expand our template a bit. So now what have we just seen? If there's not life after death and death is just the end of experience, our second premise is if there is not life after death, then death is just the end of experience. I don't know why it's changing my font. I want Times New Roman. If tilde L horseshoe E, if there's not life after death, then death is the end of experience. That's our second premise. And now let me pause let me interrupt my, let me change my system here. I've been going through it one premise at a time, symbolizing the premise and symbolizing the premise and symbolizing its parts at the same time. This is not the best way to do this. It's better to symbolize all the parts and then symbolize all the premises. Usually that's best. I thought it was good to not follow that standard procedure because I wanted to emphasize the right way of symbolizing this tilde L stuff. But now let's do this in a different way. Probably our next atomic proposition should be given the color, I don't know, let's do green. And it's there is no suffering after death. And I think we want to symbolize that with probably an S. S is good. Oh no, wait a minute. Let's make it M for there is no suffering after death. Now this almost could be a rookie mistake here. Maybe we should say S is there is suffering after death and treat this premise as, treat this statement as not an atomic statement, but as a negation of an atomic statement. The atomic statement is there is suffering after death and its negation is there's no suffering after death. Let me think about that. There is suffering after death. That's right. That's right. I'm pretty sure that's the right way to do it. So I botched this. I think we'll still keep the green. There we go. We'll keep the green, but the atomic proposition here is there is suffering after death. And what this premise is dealing with is the negation of that, the claim that there's no suffering after death. So this is the better and more accurate way of symbolizing the argument. We'll work out some details when we get to premise 3 here in a little bit. Now, there's no point in fearing death. Oh, What do you think about that? Should we symbolize this as another negation of an atomic proposition? The atomic proposition would be there is a point in fearing death. So now I have to ask myself, is the proposition there's no point in fearing death an absolute negation of the proposition there is a point in fearing death? And the different parts of logic do connect. At the moment, my brain's going to traditional square of opposition back in categorical logic. There is a point, there's no point. Those really are opposites, right? So in categorical logic terms, actually, it's there is a point, there's no point. It's E versus I on the square of opposition. Anyway, there is a point in fearing death. Let's see. If there's no suffering after death, there's no point in fearing death. And no matter what, or there's no point in fearing death anyway. There we go. So that's every time this premise this atomic proposition occurs, and let's make it dark blue. No, let's make it purple. I like purple. Let's make it purple. So this atomic proposition is, there is a point in fearing death. Let's make it F for fear. Okay, so now, what else? There's life after death. Hey, look at that. Silly me, this one did occur again. There is life after death. Occurred there. So now we need to be good no matter what. That's an atomic proposition. And that proposition we shall give a color, and that color shall be brown. And how shall we symbolize it? We need to be good no matter what. I think G. And then I think we have one more atomic proposition. There's no point committing some injustice to save our own lives. And again, I think we do not want to say that that is itself an atomic proposition. That's a negation of an atomic proposition. The atomic proposition is there is a point committing some injustice to save our own lives. We need a new color. Some of these just look so much like the other ones to me. Orange. We don't have orange yet. We'll use orange. Good. All right, so this is going to be I for injustice. There we go. Those are our atomic propositions. So we've already symbolized our first two premises. What's our next premise? If death is the end of experience, then there's no suffering after death. That means if E, then not S. Now I want to get this right. So not S, I want to symbolize more symbolically with tilde S. And if E, then not S, I want to symbolize using a horseshoe. E horseshoe, tilde S. Our next premise, my goodness, this gets confusing when there's so many premises to look at. Let's number them. We've just done the third premise. So now we need the fourth premise. If there is no suffering after death and there's no point fearing death, we're going to have a horseshoe here and a lot of tildes. If there's no suffering after death, then there's no point fearing death. So if not S, then not F. Let's see if we got that right. If there's no suffering after death, then there's no point in fearing death. If there's not suffering after death, then there's not a point in fearing death. If not S, then not F. Looks right to me. Now, fifth premise, sixth premise, we're going to need 5, 6, We're going to need at least 7, but I predict, we'll see if my prediction holds true. I predict we're going to need an 8th. But let's do the 5th premise and work towards that. If there's life after death, then we need to be good no matter what. That looks a little simpler. If L, then G. If there's life after death, then we need to be good no matter what. 6th premise, therefore, either we need to be good no matter what, or there's no point in fearing death anyway. Either G or not F. Either we need to be good no matter what, or there's no point in fearing death anyway. Either G or not F. G or not F. Either we need to be good no matter what, or there's not a point in fearing death anyway. Either G or not F. Looks good to me. Now, the conclusion is going to be either way, there's no point committing some injustice to save our own lives. Actually, that's not the conclusion. The conclusion is there's no point committing some injustice to save our own lives. The conclusion is simply tilde I. There's not a point committing some injustice to save our own lives. Now, the either way is implying an extra premise. Now, you can spend as much time on this as you like, and it may or may not do you some good. Try not to think too hard about it is my suggestion. You do what you need to do, but I think you don't need to think too hard about this. It's a fairly simple enthymeme, I think. An enthymeme is an argument with an unstated step, usually an unstated premise. I think here we have an unstated premise that gets us from, let's see, our L leads us to G. Our tilde L leads us through E and tilde S to tilde F. So our L leads us to G and our tilde L leads us to tilde F. So our extra premise is going to get us from this G or tilde F, this either we have to be good no matter what, or there's no point in fearing death anyway. We can add an anyway there in this atomic proposition symbolization if we want. I don't know if we need it. Our final premise is going to get us from either we need to be good no matter what, or there's no point in fearing death anyway, to there's no point in committing some injustice to save our own lives. So I think the premise is going to be another horseshoe. And that's it, except we're missing the parentheses. So this last premise, the unstated premise, that we're adding to make sure we understand the argument, correctly symbolize what Socrates is getting at. Because you can't expect him to spell out everything because people don't. That's not how human beings work. We're not freaking robots. The unstated premise would be something like this. Actually, I think it would be exactly this. If either we have to be good no matter what, or there's no point in fearing death anyway, then there's either way no point in committing some injustice to save our own skins. So that's what the final premise is. It's unstated, but it's easy to see that it's there. At least I hope it's easy. It's easy enough, I think, for most of us. If you're having difficulty, I don't know what to tell you other than keep working at it. I'm pretty sure you can do it. There are very few people who can't. Yeah, very, very few people who can't. Okay, now the only thing I need to clarify at this point before wrapping up this video is we really need these parentheses. Remember, each symbol, according to the way we use the symbols, operates on a very specific propositions. Remember, our capital letters are simple propositions not made of other propositions. And our symbols are things we do to connect other propositions to each other, but also to make bigger propositions out of smaller ones. So the tilde operates on one proposition immediately to its right. So this tilde here operates on the I to its right, and together they make one compound proposition. This tilde operates on the F to its right, and together they make one compound proposition. The wedge operates on that compound proposition to its right, and also on the G proposition to its left. The horseshoe operates on the tilde I to its right, and this whole thing to its left. But without the parentheses, we would have this compound proposition, this negation, this tilde F in the middle, being operated on by the horseshoe to its right and the wedge to its left, and then it's terribly confusing. We don't know, based on this symbolization, whether we're saying if either of these is the case, then either way, this other thing is the case, or whether we're saying either we have to be good no matter what, or if there's, what was it? Either we have to be good no matter what, or if there's no point fearing death, then there's no point committing some injustice to save our own skins. One or the other, but we don't know which. That actually isn't so far gone from the original argument, but it's still not the correct symbolization system. These are very different statements. Either we have to be good no matter what, or if there's something, then something. That's a totally different statement from if either we have to be good no matter what, or there's no point fearing death, then there's no point committing some injustice. But also, just look at this, it's bad grammar. A wedge, by definition, that's how we use the symbols. The wedge works on a proposition to its immediate right and a proposition to its immediate left, but this is the one we're concerned with here. The horseshoe works on a proposition to its immediate left and one to its immediate right, but this is the one we're concerned with here. We can't have tilde F operated on by both. It doesn't mean anything clear. This is the way to do it. You've got to include the parentheses. And then this whole compound proposition is the antecedent to horseshoe here. Cool? Well, it's cool. I hope you're cool. I hope you understand what's going on here. The logic is cool, and I hope you understand that. And I'll probably see you next time. If you've watched this far, you'll probably be there for the next one, where I think we'll introduce truth tables, and maybe we'll learn how to, well, we'll certainly learn how we could test this argument for validity. Maybe I should keep the symbolization system to see if we want to test this very argument for validity. But no, it's too many atomic propositions. The truth table will be massive. We probably won't, at least not till we get to the abbreviated truth table method. Anyway, I'll see you later, and maybe we'll see this argument later, but I'm not making any promises.